Now let's look at what's happening in Ukraine. A dam has collapsed. The Nova Kakhovka Dam in southern Ukraine fell earlier today. Millions of cubic meters of water are gushing from the reservoir behind it. About 22,000 people are at risk. 80 settlements are in the danger zone. A mass evacuation drive is currently underway. But why did the dam collapse? Ukraine has blamed Russia. It says Russian forces are trying to hamper Ukraine's counteroffensive. It has even accused Moscow of committing ecocide. Ukraine's allies are going even further. The UK and the EU say Russia has committed a war crime. Russia has given conflicting explanations so far. Initially, a Russian-appointed local governor said nothing had happened to the dam. Then, the governor said Ukraine shelled the structure overnight. Another Russian official says the dam collapsed naturally. While both sides are trading blame, only one thing is certain. The people living in the area are facing a catastrophe. Here's our report. 18 million cubic meters of water. That's the amount of water that was held behind this dam. The Nova Kakhovka Dam on the Dnipro River. Earlier today, the dam collapsed. It happened in the early hours of the day. Now there's nothing holding back the water. It has started flowing out. This drone footage shows the force of the water that's being released. Terrifying quantities pouring out every moment. The Nova Kakhovka Dam was the only thing holding it back. It's a Soviet-era dam built in 1956. It was set up to generate electricity. That hydroelectric plant has now been washed away. The reservoir behind the dam provides water to thousands. It's especially important for the people living in Crimea. Now all that water has been broken free, submerging everything in its path. It's not good news for anyone. The river banks are currently occupied by the opposing forces. Ukraine on the western bank, Russia on the east. Both sides will face the wrath. Ukraine has already started evacuations.
Dear residents of Kherson region, Russian army has conducted another terror act. It has exploded Kakhovka Dam. In 5 hours, water level will reach critical level. Evacuation of people to safe areas has started. All services are working. Emergency service, police, military are all together. I urge to take documents and essentials and wait for evacuation buses. Also, I'm addressing the residents of the left bank. Please do everything possible to save your lives and leave the insecure place at once.
So has Russia. It had earlier denied that there was a problem. The Russian-installed governor of Kherson had said the situation wasn't critical, that evacuations weren't needed. But now there's been a U-turn. Russian officials have also sounded the alarm.
The situation in Nova Kakhovka as of 9:15 a.m., water continues to rise. In order to save all lives, the evacuation of the civilians from the border regions affected by the flood is taking place. An operational headquarters has been established. Members of the headquarters, Ministry of Emergency Situations, governor, representatives of the government, they're all at the place and working. There is no panic in the city. At the moment, the water level has risen to 10 meters. Washing away of the dam continues. The maximum rise of the water level could be 12 meters.
At immediate risk are islands on the Dnipro River. Then there are the towns and cities along the river's banks. This includes major cities like Kherson, the capital of the Kherson region, the city Ukraine took back from Russian forces last year. It is already facing the effects of the dam collapse.
Today is the 6th of June 2023. I'm in Kherson. It is 10:30 a.m. After a blast at Kakhovka Dam, water flow in the Dnipro River and its tributaries is very powerful. The water level rose for 1 meter. We'll see what will happen next, but we hope for the better.
So far, no one has taken responsibility for the disaster. Not surprising, Russia and Ukraine are blaming each other. Ukrainian officials put out various tweets blaming Russia for the collapse. Zelensky blamed it on Russian terrorists. One of his advisors said Moscow wanted to create insurmountable obstacles for Kyiv's forces. Another termed the act as ecocide, sharing videos claiming to show the extent of the disaster. Russia, in turn, has blamed Ukraine. It has called the dam collapse the work of Ukrainian terrorists. Whoever is behind it, there are going to be dire consequences for the people living nearby. Towns and villages will be inundated. Thousands of homes will be destroyed. Between 16 to 22,000 people will be displaced. We mentioned earlier how the dam supplied water to Crimea. The peninsula may face water shortages now. Then the loss of the hydroelectric plant will strain energy supplies in the region. The reservoir also supplied water to cool the Zaphorizhia power plant, Europe's largest nuclear plant. It has been under Russian control since the war began. It was already in danger due to attacks. Now it could also face cooling trouble, bringing the region one step closer to a nuclear disaster. But what is already a disaster is the Nova Kakhovka Dam collapse. It can reportedly never be repaired. And while Russia and Ukraine indulge in blame game, the brunt of this will be felt by the people in the region for years to come. Now let's talk about America's friends across the pond. I'm talking about Europe, specifically France. It has a problem with NATO's plans for the Indo-Pacific. The military alliance wants to open an office in Japan. It will be NATO's first outpost in the region. President Emmanuel Macron has a problem with that. He thinks NATO shouldn't go ahead. I have Macron's statement. Listen to what he said. If we push NATO to enlarge the spectrum and the geography, we will make a big mistake. He calls the move to expand a mistake. But why? Macron thinks by expanding NATO will lose its focus. Now this is a problem. If NATO wants an office in Japan, it just cannot go ahead and build one. An expansion like that needs to be put through a vote. The proposal will go to the North Atlantic Council, the highest decision-making body of NATO. All NATO members are represented there. They'll vote on this proposal and their verdict needs to be unanimous. Only then will NATO be able to open an office in Japan. So France will be a stumbling block. Is this proposal unprecedented? Not at all. NATO has a dozen more liaison offices or delegations. They're spread out across the world. There's one in Ukraine too, a country in the middle of a conflict. Most of these offices are small. They help in maintaining ties with the host country's military and government. NATO hasn't formally announced this, but reports say NATO wants something similar in Japan, a small office, one that can help the military alliance stay in touch with Tokyo. The idea is not a new one. NATO and Japan have been considering this since 2007. Now in 2018, Tokyo opened an office in Brussels. Brussels hosts the NATO headquarters. The war in Ukraine has led to deeper ties. Last year, Fumio Kishida was invited for the NATO summit. This year's summit is scheduled for July. Lithuania is hosting the event and the Japanese Prime Minister is invited again. Now earlier this year, the NATO chief was in Tokyo. He had hailed Japan's decision to spend more on its military.
I also told him that I strongly welcome Japan's historic new national security strategy. And I'm glad that Japan is planning to reach the NATO benchmark of 2% of GDP devoted to defense. This demonstrates that Japan takes international security seriously. It makes you an even more powerful partner for peace.
So both sides like each other. Then why is Macron opposed? Maybe because he doesn't want to anger China. Macron is trying to court Beijing. Earlier this year, he traveled to China. It was a high-profile visit. Beijing left no stone unturned for this. It went all out to make Macron feel welcomed. The French president, too, did not disappoint the Chinese. He made all the right noises. In China, Macron spoke out about the Taiwan issue and the larger fight between the US and China. The French president said that Europe should stay away from this conflict. He also thinks the region should not snap economic ties with Beijing. Listen in.
We must not be naive. Our European Union, taking this step of European sovereignty that I defended 5 years ago, is establishing trade defense instruments that are necessary for our credibility. But the European Union must also be voluntarily committed to continuing to have a trade relationship with China.
Well, that sounded a lot like appeasement. US and its allies too saw it that way. They were not happy with Macron's outreach. But the criticism has not affected Macron much. It seems he's still on the same path. That's why perhaps he's pushing NATO to stay away from the Indo-Pacific. But other NATO members have different thoughts. They're deepening their ties with the region. Consider what's happening in New Delhi this week. Defense ministers of leading NATO nations are visiting India. Yesterday, US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was here. He spoke out about NATO's plans for the region.
We are absolutely not trying to establish a NATO in the Indo-Pacific. We continue to work with like-minded countries to ensure that the region remains free and open.
Today, the German defense minister was in New Delhi. There's talk of a submarine deal. Reports say Germany wants to build submarines in India. So one way or another, NATO members are taking more interest in the region. Obviously, regional players like India will set the terms of engagement, but more cooperation is inevitable, whether Macron likes it or not. Will AI take your job? If only we got a penny every time someone asked this question. Well, today we are asking again because a new report has revealed some worrying data. It was prepared by a global HR firm, and what does the report say? That artificial intelligence caused 3,900 layoffs in May. Now that's a big headline. Almost 4,000 jobs taken away by AI. What sort of jobs are we talking about? All kinds, spread across industries. IBM said last month that they would slash 6,800 jobs. CBS News fired 2 copywriters, and media company CNET laid off reporters. AI is now writing articles for them, so the obvious question is, should you be worried? First, let's have a look at this data. It covers only US companies. In the month of May, they announced more than 80,000 job cuts. Out of this, 3,900 were because of AI. If you do the maths, that's around 5% of all cuts. It is certainly high, but look at the other factors as well. 19,000 jobs were lost because the business shut down. Market conditions led to 14,000 job cuts, and 13,000 job cuts were attributed to no reason. What does that tell you? The overall economic outlook is gloomy. The same report says that consumer confidence is at a 6-month low. Companies are putting the brakes on hiring, and that's not because of AI. That's because their business has flatlined. I have more numbers for you. From January to May, the US lost 417,000 jobs. It's the highest since the 2008 recession. So blaming artificial intelligence is not the solution. We need to stimulate the economy. We need to boost consumer spending. If not, companies will keep trimming their workforce. They will keep swapping paid employees for unpaid AI. Let's also look at the long term. Is the risk of an AI takeover real? Goldman Sachs had a worrying assessment recently. They said 300 million jobs could be lost to AI. Now that's a lot. AI could take over a quarter of all work tasks in Europe and the US. Which jobs would be worst hit? 46% tasks in the administrative field would be affected. So would 44% tasks in the legal field. The least affected will be physical jobs, say construction or maintenance. It's important to take this report with a pinch of salt. Yes, jobs will be lost, but new ones will also be created. Around 60% people today are doing jobs that did not exist in 1940. What does that tell you? That the job market keeps evolving. Current assessments are based on speculation about AI. Nobody knows how this technology will pan out. So 300 million could be the worst case scenario, or maybe it could be an impossible scenario. Always remember that. Another factor to note is productivity. Companies will switch to AI only if it's profitable, if the AI is cheaper and better. But what if humans team up with AI? What if the human-AI partnership is more efficient than either of them working alone? We already have evidence. A recent study found that 14% employees who used ChatGPT saw an increase in productivity. Some workers finished their tasks 35% faster. My point is, it's not a zero-sum game. It doesn't have to be human or artificial intelligence. It can be humans and AI. But to do that, the economy needs to be robust. If companies are struggling to survive, they will cut corners. They will jump at the chance of reducing costs. If that means AI, then so be it. So this report about 4,000 job cuts isn't just a commentary on AI. It's also a commentary on the global economy. Have you heard of a phenomenon called lying flat? It's a recent trend among the Chinese youth. People are so flat out tired of working that they just lie down on a couch, on grass, frankly anywhere. And they simply lie there doing nothing. They actively chalk out time to be idle. Because in China, idleness is a form of rebellion, a way to push back against the damaging and inescapable burnout culture, where people work long hours, brave endless competition, and push their bodies to the breaking point. Because this is the reality of work culture in China. This is a Chinese woman traveling on a Shanghai subway with an intravenous or IV drip inserted in her hand. She's holding a bottle of fluid over her head on the way to work. Why? Because she's unwell, but she can't take a day off, much like many other workers in China. And they are all exhausted. Why won't they be? There's record unemployment in China. 1 in 5 young people in Chinese cities are out of work. The job market is shrinking, pay scale is falling. So people who are employed are fiercely holding on to their jobs, doing their best to stay on board no matter what. The result? A difficult work commute with a banana bag over the head and a needle in the arm. It is safe to say that China's work culture is toxic. The irony is, it's not without a fan following. Remember when Chinese tech tycoon Jack Ma famously called the 996 a blessing? 996 is their so-called work culture, where people work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. Employers have enforced this across sectors for the longest time. In 2021, Chinese authorities took action against the 996. They issued a stern reminder to companies, saying that such punishing work schedules are illegal. It was China's clearest warning against the toxic culture of overwork. Yet, the situation remains grim. According to China's labor laws, a standard workday is 8 hours, with a maximum of 44 hours a week. Any work beyond that requires extra pay for overtime. But this has not been well enforced. In fact, in many of the country's biggest firms, employees aren't compensated for working overtime. The government takes a hands-off approach, and a culture of overwork thrives, all while oozing toxicity, which is inextricably tied to the New Age narrative of hustle culture. It promotes the idea that there's always more to strive for, more money to make, a bigger title to chase, or a supposed higher ceiling to break. So working bees must do more, be more, and never say never. But don't be mistaken, this unhealthy culture is not limited to China. Studies show that workers around the world put in an average of 9.2 hours of unpaid overtime per week. Gambia, Mongolia, Maldives, Qatar, and India are some of the most overworked countries in the world. Here, work weeks stretch up to over 48 hours. South Koreans work an average of over 1,900 hours a year. That's nearly 200 more than the OECD average. Meanwhile, neighboring Japan averaged over 1,600 hours. Both these countries are notorious for their tough work culture. So much so, death by overwork is widely reported phenomenon here. Yes, people are literally working themselves to death. And if not death, then adverse lifelong health problems like body aches, stroke, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, anxiety, and even depression. Work cultures view people as replaceable machine parts who toil in a dehumanized workplace. And yet, we continue to rise and grind, move fast and break things and hustle harder. We unknowingly join the cult of overwork, only for it to be a fast track to burnout and sometimes even death. Work till you drop has become our life motto, but it's time to change that. We need to lift our nose from the grindstone and take a long, hard look at our sweatshop, where glorification of overwork hails supreme, and we are told our work is our worth. Overwork may be the price we pay for success, but at what cost? And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with Canada, wildfires are burning in the province of British Columbia. Officials say Canada is on track to witness its worst wildfire season. In Greece, divers are trying to pull out what they call ghost nets from the depths of the Aegean Sea. Thousands of fish have died because of these nets. And in Argentina, a football match turned into a display of fireworks in its final moments. This left the commentators and the audience stunned. And finally, what makes June 6th significant? We're taking you back in history. Today, India marks the 39th anniversary of the Operation Blue Star. On this day in 1984, the Operation Blue Star was carried out to eliminate militants who had taken shelter in the Golden Temple. This happened in the Indian state of Punjab. The operation was ordered by India's then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. She was assassinated later in 1984. We leave you with this. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.
No, no se puede creer lo que está ocurriendo ahora en el estadio. No, no se puede creer. Bienvenidos a la Primera Nacional del fútbol argentino, señores.
Pero no terminó.
Y se viene el Deportivo Maipú. Y este es Herrera. 30 segundos finales, entra al área. Le va a quedar la pelota a Paredes. Este es Paredes. ¡Vamos, señores! ¡Ha ganado al Deportivo Maipú aquí en Mendoza! Extraordinaria fiesta.